The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dane and Derek Show this fine Wednesday morning. This is a podcast where two nerdy friends keep in touch and shoot the shit. And my name is Benig-Aiello. I'm a writer, director, and avid tabletop RPG player. And with me, as always, is my good friend, Dane Fogdahl.
Hey, I'm Dane. I'm writer, musician, podcaster, and a lover of tabletop RPGs. We're back at on our shit, aren't we?
Yes, we are finally doing another D&D episode or tabletop episode for the broader sense, because I know you play a lot of World and I play a lot of Quest now. So, but yeah, finally, it feels like it's been a long time since we've done a dedicated episode.
It feels like it, but I somewhere in my brain, I'm like, I don't actually think it has been. I feel like it's long for us, but it's not long for like other people.
You are completely right. And for those wondering, or for those who haven't read the title of this week's episode, we're talking about campaign setting philosophy this week. Arguably the most daunting task any game master has to deal with when making a game for friends is, what the fuck do you do with a campaign setting?
Yeah. So real quick, I do have a question. Do you have a favorite, like, quote unquote, official campaign setting?
From, I do.
Like, D&D Wizard. What is it?
It's Eberron.
Is it Greyhawk? Oh, no, it's Eberron. Okay.
Greyhawk's great. I've played in Greyhawk a lot, but personally, I really like Eberron.
Yeah.
How about you?
Okay, this is sort of cheating. I like Theros.
Oh, that's not cheating.
Well, Theros is technically a Magic the Gathering plane, but now it's
so
also a setting.
Realms.
Yeah, so that's getting messy.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So I have the Theros 5e book, and it's super fun and really cool. So I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, I'm guessing that you like Theros for the same reasons that I like Eberron, which is that they're not so stock fantasy.
Yeah, they're not super like common D&D fantasy style.
Yeah, like to me, Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk are pretty interchangeable.
Yeah, Greyhawk's just grittier, basically.
Yeah, exactly, because it's a world post the conquering of a tyrant, and Forgotten Realms is a world at war. Forgotten Realms is Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones.
I would actually I would describe Greyhawk and Greyhawk is to Westeros what Forgotten Realms is to Middle Earth. Okay. Their tone is Forgotten Realms is a lighter tone than Greyhawk, but yeah. To be fair, they're both darker than I don't know. Depends on what part of Tolkien you're reading. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Point being,
Eberron is like aetherpunk. Like
it's like
steampunky. Like it's very different. And Theros is knockoff Greek myth.
Exactly.
We'll just be honest.
That's what I think Eberron and Theros do so well, is they give you so many more options.
Yeah, like in Eberron, you can be like Warforged or like a super big thing, like basically fantasy robots. And in Theros, you can be like this is like something that was super cool to me, is like you can be a like song that was so beautiful it came to life and became a person. Like, I'm like, that's dope. Like that's super cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's the interesting thing though. As cool as these are, I never fucking use them. Like ever when I'm running a game.
I haven't picked up a campaign setting in literal years. I think since the last game I played with you, like in early high school, that was the last time I played a game in Eberron.
Right, you ran right.
Yeah,
oh my
that
God.
was the last time I ran a game in a campaign setting because
right.
And I think you would agree. I don't know if this is why you make your own campaign settings, but those books are so goddamn overwhelming to read sometimes. And as beautiful as they are, it can present you with so many options, you become paralyzed.
I find it difficult to absorb. for sure.
They're dense.
I find it very difficult to absorb, because it's not mine in a sense. Like, one of the reasons I have never really been able to play, say, the Star Wars RPG or the Lord of the Rings RPG, or I kind of got into the Dragon Age RPG, and there's a reason for that. Which is, at the time I hadn't really played the games yet, so it just felt like a fantasy setting, so it was like whatever. My problem often with pre-made settings is that all of the important details have already been filled in. Like, something that like gets me about like Forgotten Realms is it doesn't matter how good the campaign is. Nobody gets to be Dritz.
Right. There's already heroes that exist.
Right. It's like with like the Star Wars one, it's like, yeah, I get it. They're fighting stormtroopers and they're doing cool stuff and we can make a fun story. But we all know somewhere out there in our game, Luke, Han, and Leia are doing shit, and it's more important.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't get to blow up the Death Star. You don't get to blow up the Death Star.
Right.
Right? Like, you don't get to be the person who threw the one ring into the mountain. Like, and that's why I like to come up with, I prefer to do my own settings, regardless of the numerous way I've done that now, is because I want the players to be the central figures. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I always come back to it as like, tabletop RPGs are a storytelling device. It can be very wargamey, and there is a way to play them that's more or less just analog video game.
Right.
But when I think that they're at their best, or at least when they're the most satisfying for me, is we're collectively telling a story. And something that always strikes me is like, when you're telling a story, you should be telling the story that is important, right? Like, if you're telling a story in a setting and with these characters, there should be a reason why you're telling this story and not something else. So like, if we're playing in Forgotten Realms, my brain is always like, but Forgotten Realms' hero is Dritz, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be focused there, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, right? It's a little bit easier when you craft a setting to weave in the characters into that mythology a lot more.
Yeah.
Because in these pre-made settings, like you said, all the important details are filled out. The map is completely discovered. All the cities have long, expansive histories. There's been heroes before. And unless you're like kind of making a parody of it, it can be very difficult. I think I remember when we played the Immortals game back in high school. You know, that was one of the
that was one I ran, and the world I came up with.
Yep, one of the best games that I think we both ever played in. You know, that was a world where you put this band of scoundrels at the forefront of the narrative, which enabled us to be a band of scoundrels up until we couldn't be, for lack of a better way to put it.
Up until you decided that you weren't anymore.
Yes, up until we decided that we needed to change our ways. But on top of that, like, there were a lot of details that I remember you explained to me afterwards, were things that you were like, yeah, if y'all went this way, these things might have happened. But because that didn't happen, we went this way, right? And it's like, there's all these sort of magic items and characters that we met along the way that, you know, depending on certain things, ended up playing bigger roles. And that sort of flexibility, it's a little harder to find ways to insert that into a pre-made setting. And also, this is something I do really want to talk about, which is your map making technique. The one map at a time, which I believe that was the first one you did that on.
One map at a time.
Yeah.
Where I would do one region at a time and build out. Yeah.
One region, which I think, when you think about it like that, when you think about creating a starter sandbox for players that's pretty small, I think that is what makes coming up with your own campaign setting, at least for me, really appealing. Because then you only have to worry about the confines of this, and you don't have to think that much beyond that.
Yeah. So my philosophy around building your own campaign setting has changed a bit over the years. As the games I've played changed. So like with that Immortals campaign, one thing that like I needed was we were all pretty still in like the wargamey phase, especially with some of the players at that table. It was very combat heavy. It was very adventure heavy. Not a lot of like interpersonal drama between characters. Because that's just kind of like the phase we were in.
Right.
So like the world, I kind of was way more sandboxy. Like I was like, here's a map. I have everything on this map pre-prepared. So you just go wherever the fuck you want. And it's going to be fine. I have it prepared. We're going to do it. It's going to be great. Now what I do is it's way more, I'll take one of two tracks now, which is either I'm going to generate this with my players as we go. Meaning that maybe we're going to play a game that is a world building game. Maybe we're going to play a city building game. Or last major long-term campaign I ran, we started with the origin story of two major gods. Like we played out a creation myth and then did a world building thing and then played a game that set up the main problem. And then we played a campaign dealing with that problem in Dungeon World. Which you can listen to all of on Diceology. It's the Shepherd's season.
Yeah.
So like that's one way. Whereas like when I sat down, we started with literally nothing except the fact that Natalie was like, I kind of want to play a warrior explorer goddess. And I was like, I kind of want to play a home and hearth god. And then we went, everything else came from that, basically. And so it like took this seed and it like spun it out, which has the advantage of everybody is really bought in because everybody helped make it and everybody has like some ownership over it. What I will say is that route tends to be a little less holistic in a sense. Like in some ways it's really holistic and nobody has more ownership over the world than others. But on the other hand, it's not quite as cohesive is maybe the better word. Because so many people have their like fingers in it, right? So it's not super consistent. And it also, there are types of players who really, really struggle with that because like for some people, there's literally nothing scarier than a blank page, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really hard for them to create a character, to create an idea from nothing. And so like some people will crack open a campaign setting book from Wizards of the Coast and be like, oh my God, I can totally figure out how to make a character in this. Awesome. Right. Because it gives them the bones to work around. So my other philosophy, which is the one I'm running with right now, is basically to just make my own campaign setting book. And just leave out the heroes essentially. Right. Like, and then when people come to me with ideas, be really flexible. So like right now, what I'm working with is like the basic of the campaign is like, it's a fantasy setting that's heavily Norse inspired. So there's like a world tree and all this stuff. And then the world ended. Ragnarok happened. Everything got fucked up. And it's over. And now the world is very different and quite a bit less legendary, but maybe better for people, even though it's a little wilder and a little more ruined. And so like that was my baseline. And then one of my players came to me and was like, I really want to play the psychic class. And I hadn't built in psionics at all. And I was like, dope. We're just going to do it. Like, great. I'm like, now it's a thing. So that's like the other way to do it. And like, I have like this thing called a scabbard, which is pretty cool tool. We'll talk about that sort of stuff some other time, but like where it's more or less like almost a wiki, like a private wiki for players so that they can like, I can just hand it to them and they can like explore around and dig into it as much or as little as they want or need.
Oh, very cool.
And like my needs around this campaign are very different. Like when we were in high school, I knew that we would get to Ryan's house at like 11 a.m. and we leave at like midnight.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So like these dungeons could be expansive and like I could like fuck around with it and it could be this like endless sort of like thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're a bunch of adults who have 4 hours on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
Right. And so like the way it is that it's not actually useful for me to make those maps like I used to, as much as I enjoy doing them. So I actually have a whole kind of like world map with like cities and major regions in them,
mm-hmm.
so that people can like get a sense of stuff. But I don't have every square mapped out because the assumption is not that you guys are going to go crawling through every little nook and cranny. What people want is for me to kind of give them an episode of TV. And so like what I need is like a certain amount of premise and stuff. So in like this case, like they're all part of a caravan. So essentially I can have them be moving around the map as much as I want, but not everybody has to show up. And all I have to say is like, oh yeah, they stayed at the caravan this time. But when you guys picked up and moved halfway across the map between last Thursday and today, they were along. They're not like stuck in town. Town moves. And like the setting has so many ruins in it so that basically every time the dungeon's right there. And so they're going to go and be able to do a thing and have like a really concise adventure and then come back and reset. And so like, this is a really long way for me to say my opinion about campaign setting is like, make the setting that works for the game you need to play.
Yes.
Right. So for my players, that's what they need. So I'm going to make that for them. For the show, it needs something way different, something way more structured, because we have to entertain. You know.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's exactly the dilemma I faced when designing the campaign setting for the show that I just put out, like earlier this week.
Hell yeah.
Like I had to think about, how does this world work? How much is too much lore to be said over audio waves? And how can the players feel central to the storyline without getting swallowed up by too much? And how can they also discover things along the way?
Yeah.
I think it's funny because like, I when you said that you're building your own campaign book, I was kind of like smiling because that's kind of how I do it. In the old days, I would have like a college ruled notebook that I would write everything in. Now I just have a long Google Doc with everything, and then I copy and paste whatever I need into sort of a document for the players, and I'll put like pictures and stuff because that's fun. But yeah, like coming up with a sort of world that kind of fits the game. Like I found that for me, like coming up with like a log line almost for the setting, and then seeing what people initially say, what they want to do as a character, and then kind of going from that to then being like, okay, well, maybe the world is like this, and then whittling that down. Cause like, I think when I initially was pitching around this show in this campaign setting, I was like, it's an ancient world with a sorcerer, and the sorcerer has minions everywhere, and the minion is ruled, wahaha. And then somebody was like, well, what if the sorcerer was a natural disaster? And I was like, oh, cool, like a drought. And then we went from there, and then that turned into like, oh, maybe like the drought was caused by a dragon that has been gone, and maybe that's the premise of the campaign, is that the dragon is now back. And because I call it world building light because I hate lore. I hate coming up with lore. It's so much fun, but it's so hard to remember. So I always do the thing where it's like, oh yeah, that's a lost thing. Like that way, whenever it comes up, it can be kind of added or improvised in the world, you know?
Yep. I have gotten away with that by being like people have like asked me like, hey, so like in the lore, and I'm like, they're like, would this thing have been like culturally important? I'm like, I don't know. Because that's ancient lost thing from when before the world ended.
Yeah.
So like, I'm like, I don't know, maybe. And I can also like say no if it's just a little like that would be game breaking. Please don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting because like I very much like what kind of relating to last week's episode, I kind of look to other like television shows and fantasy genre like media to kind of see how my world is going to be influenced, right? And like my
Yeah.
current game is very influenced by like Beastmaster and Breath of the Wild and like Princess Mononoke and like Xena Warrior Princess. Like those were like my big inspirations going into the world.
Yeah, mine for this one was Norse mythology right at the top, Dark Souls and Breath of the Wild. Like those were the ones.
Nice. And like I think like like you keep iterating and like we keep talking about like having the characters being central to the storyline, or not even sort of to the world building and crafting a world that fits those characters is so incredibly important. Like I was playing a Masks game and I was having a really hard time crafting like a superhero city. So instead of crafting a superhero city, I was like, what if it's just Los Angeles in the year 2030 something? Right. And we just call it Neo Angeles. And that way I can reference all these places my friends know. And that ended up really informing a lot of like the characters. Like one person was like, oh, I want to go to like the USC equivalent. That's where my character goes to school. Another person was like, I want my person to be like a former child star. And what does that look like in a world where they have superheroes? So you know, there's no need for visual effects. And you know, like that was like a great springboard to kind of build a lot of these other elements of the world, like the fact that there's like superhero influencers and stuff like that. And that was all kind of like a combination of like putting it in something that gave enough context that then opened up the door. Which I guess is like a really great way, a really good point about a campaign setting, right? Is like the campaign setting gives context for the characters. It's not necessarily the most important thing.
Yes. Yeah. So like I pulled up my campaign like lore book right now, and I'm realizing, so it's got a table of contents. Wow. And so like I'm looking at my characters pages, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So over half of the characters I have right now are player characters.
Nice.
Because that's something like I was like, I don't want to fill in like, and like the NPCs I have right now are ones that are super necessary. Like who leads their caravan? Like that one's pretty important, right? Like certain ones that I need to set in. And what I'm currently been gathering from people are NPCs connected already to their characters.
Yeah.
And then I might come up with some other ones that are just for fun, or ones that I'm like, oh, I'm going to need this. But what I realize is like super important. The one big section that is like bigger than any other is groups for me. So like collections of people, the groups that influence the world more than individuals. And like the other big thing is like places, so like towns and like regions, and then like things that I did really want to know, like I have like how the undead work, because anybody who's ever played a fantasy game with me knows I fucking love the undead for some reason. I don't know why, but like the undead are fucking rad to me, so I'm like, I always use that. But I also have like justice as like a thing, because I was like, okay, a number of these people have like skirted around and fucked with the law, so I need to know. You know, like like that is like really important. Or like magic. Like I have like a really big long page about how magic works. And something I did this time that I don't think I've ever done before is I put in the monsters that exist. So like, and the reason I did that is like, I want them to feel very part of the world. So I want my players to know about them beforehand.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I am kind of shocked that you don't pre-pick your monsters beforehand. Um,
It used to be that I would just have the monster manual, and whatever I
right.
needed for the dungeon, I would just pick. And some of it was about like, beholders are fun as a GM,
Right.
like,
No, yeah. That's just interesting to me because like I definitely like before every campaign setting, I go through like a monsters manual or like or like a mythology like Wikipedia, and I look for creatures that I think would make sense to have in the world, because I find it almost as important as like knowing where every village is. Like the fact that I know that there's a dragon that lives here and some sort of a strange crocodile creature that lives here, and like a forest full of will-o'-wisps down here. Like that's like important to me. But that's funny that you've like just adopted a kind of method like that.
Yeah. I've just never been quite so intense about this. Like, like there would be like whole campaigns where I just never touch a demon, for example. But like I would cut out huge chunks of the monster manual, but not the whole, not so specific. Like in this case, it's like there's undead, of a few variations. There's, let's see, giant scorpions, thunderbirds, wyverns, winter wolves, and then some weird trees. And that's it. And my justification for it being that like when there were multiple realms in the old world, only a few creatures managed to make it into the new world after the old world ended. So I've just never been so specific about why these particular ones.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, it's like we've been talking about, like my philosophy around world building and setting campaign settings, especially when I'm doing this much prep work, as opposed to just being like, yeah, we're going to sit down and do a world building game together, is that like it's really key for me to like be able to center stage who I'm playing with. And something I realized though is that like as much as I love the world building games, a lot of the players I'm with right now, they don't like that. It doesn't help them. So I was like, I need to sit down and for the first time in a long time, put some heart and soul in this so that they have like a foundation to work on.
Yeah.
And finding the balance, because on the one hand, I like the world I'm in, and something that happens in campaigns that you run, I'm sure you know this, is that like NPCs will become really important. And often not the NPCs you expect.
Oh, all the time.
And so like part of me is like there's always a temptation when you're starting out, because you're so in love with the world and you've been working on it, to like make your, for lack of a better term, to make your character in it. So I've been like kind of resisting that temptation lately.
Yeah.
Especially just because I want to see the NPCs they come up with and make sure everything kind of like fits in nicely. And then make NPCs without a huge expectation around them being the ones that they fall for, because like I'll say a character name that I know you're going to remember, Jane.
Oh my God. Yeah. Jane.
Like
Jane.
Jane was not supposed to be important. Jane was a major character in that Immortals campaign that Derek was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
She was just supposed to be the fucking innkeep, and then y'all were really evil, and I needed somebody to keep you guys in line. So she turned into a, from like just a barkeep who happened to be like an Eldrin, into a 15th or 20th level like Eldrin Fey warlock who had retired, and she was like a princess or some shit, because I was like, okay, I need somebody who can like put the fear of God in these motherfuckers so that they just won't raise this town to the ground.
Yeah, well, I mean, our party was quite ill composed for heroics. An undead monk, a vampire, an anti-paladin, I'm pretty sure, and a bounty hunter, and a couple of other folks that
evil wizard.
Evil wizard, yeah.
Not a necromancer,
yeah.
just an evil wizard.
Just an evil wizard, right?
Didn't do necromancy.
Didn't do
no
necromancy.
necromantic
Just-
spells. Just like would use fireball in such a dickish way.
Yeah. Oh my god, I am having so many memories of getting hit by that fireball. That damn fireball.
Ryan had to take a break because he had gotten hit so many times by the fireball. He was playing a vampire, so he was frequent. Fire was one of the very few problems for him.
Man.
But anyways, like I needed this character and I didn't expect her to be important, but then I had to give her more powers, and like you guys really liked hanging out with her, and so by the end she was almost, I would say, close to a main character.
She was definitely a main character by the end, because like, I mean, spoilers for a campaign none of you were at. Like in the final battle, like the Lich, the villain that we had been chasing after, like, you know, was like, haha, I've bound my life to hers. If you kill me, she dies.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. And I killed him. And then Ryan, and I looked at Ryan and I was like,
okay, because Ryan was a vampire who had fallen in love with her.
Yeah. And then I was like, do it. And then he turned her into a vampire.
Yeah.
Because I was like, we found a hack. And it was like that moment. I think about that moment of role playing so much. Because like you constructed a world, right, where those decisions were possible. And I think that's truly what we're that's another thing that we're getting at, right? Is we're crafting a world where decisions are possible and where players feel like they are in control of their narrative as much as possible.
Which is part of the reason why the pre-made settings or games that take place in like video game worlds or movie worlds so often don't work for me, is because here's a problem with playing in the Star Wars universe, especially with the way their RPG is right now. You can never overthrow the Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't. You cannot be the one who kills Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. You can't do it. Not unless, and then it just like swerves so far into like fan fiction for me that it feels like the world is no longer the real one. And like,
yes, it doesn't feel as authentic.
Right. And that's like part of it is that's why I like the original one so much, is because it's like, no, everybody can have a Forgotten Realms campaign, but you, me, Ryan, all those guys, we're the only ones who ever got to be in the Immortal realm.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. That's it. Right? Like this game that I'm about to start running, which I'm calling Realms into Saplings, I'm running for a large number of people and multiple groups, but that's it. It's their world. It's theirs. Like truly, it is theirs. Yeah. And that's something that I think is also an important philosophy is, as a GM, if you're in this situation where you do have to do a lot of prep, and do a lot of world building and campaign setting creation and all of this, remember that you're not making it just for you. Right. It's important that you have fun with it and that you love it, but it's theirs too. Right. Like, and like, that's when it gets so impactful, right? Like it's so important that like, for me, that this realm I'm making for them is their realm. Yeah. And that they get to play in it in the same way that it is so important. It was so important to me that, you know, that Jane mattered and that the Lich King mattered. Yeah. And that the truth was, if you guys don't save the world, no one is going to. Exactly. Right? Like, and that's the crux of so many games. Right. Like when you craft them. If you guys aren't going on an adventure, there's no other adventure to tell about this place. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Which is odd because at the same time you do want to make it feel alive, right? Like, yeah. There's, it's a balance. Yeah, it is a balance. And I think like what's nice about having a campaign book at the end of all of that prep, right? Mm-hmm. Is if you get to be in the position where you're lucky enough to play with the same people in the same world again with new characters, like a Critical Role or something. Yeah. You get to do something completely different again. Like that's an experience that like I have yet to experience. I've had
Yeah.
it.
Well, yeah, because you did it with the Immortals, right? And
No,
several.
we kind of with the
kind of.
Immortals. No, I finally got to play in one like that.
Man.
So here's the crazy shit with this one. So this one's the one that's winding down. So we played a game that gently we call God Squad. And we played a game, and in the end, my character ascended from mortal to godhood. We flash forward like 8,000 years or something. And like multiple ages have passed, and we're playing a completely different set of characters, but all the rules have stayed the same. We all know who all the gods are already. And a lot of the places survived, but our GM changed them or ruined things, or our choices mattered and reverberated out. And now we're playing a second set of characters who are doing a similar thing. And it's been fantastic. And I will say maybe the most amazing thing is that at this point, near the end of the second campaign, on some level, I am playing my old character as much as I'm playing my current one. Because she's a goddess and is like still alive and is still influencing events. But it's so much fun to genuinely get to play an Obi-Wan Kenobi style role. Because so much of these games is like focused around people currently in an adventure, whereas like it's weird to be playing someone who's like, no, my story is like over, but I'm not going anywhere, so I'm gonna give advice and like offer my opinion, you know, like so that's wild. So yeah, it's super fun to do that, but it only happens when like everybody buys in and like the world is consistent and it's yours, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something very static about the Forgotten Realms. There's something really static about Greyhawk.
Yes.
They're not going to change. You can't change too much to it. And the next time you sit down, odds on things will have reset.
Yeah.
You know, and like,
yeah, no, yeah, that is such a great way to put it. They're static in the sense of like they exist, they're there, they're waiting, but they're not. They're like an MMO, you know?
Yeah, like if like in Greyhawk, let's say you burn down the city of Greyhawk at the end of a campaign somehow. Let's say you did that. Well, next time you start a campaign in Greyhawk, you probably need Greyhawk back.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Whereas like in any game we play, like you and me would play together, like if you burn down the main city, well, shit, you burned down the main city. You know, like, oh, like here's the thing, in that Immortals campaign, you guys like killed most of like the Drow.
Oh yeah.
Like, which, you know, like going back, like this is kind of before you and I kind of like got into like more, for lack of a better term, like social justice-y things. So like Drow back then for us were just monsters. They were just monsters, right? Like no different than a giant spider.
Yeah,
really.
I don't really remember why we did that. I just know that
because
we
they killed Jane's little sister.
Oh, okay.
And you guys were too slow, and you felt bad.
Oh, that was one of our.
Yeah,
I remember
they turned her into a Drider, a half spider person, and you guys had to kill her. Knew you'd have to go tell Jane what happened and the fact that you guys were too slow to save her, and you guys lost your minds. Like, yeah, that collectively, like the six of you at the table all lost your minds and just spent the rest of like a 6-hour session going through this like massive like super dungeon.
Oh my goodness.
And then going to like digging around until you found the map that was like, and here's where the rest of our Drow hideouts are. Went around and just killed them all.
We went full Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I forgot that we were that evil.
Yeah. You guys had, that was before your turn. You were close to your turn because you had started caring about people, but not so far as to think like maybe let's not kill everybody.
Right.
Which brings
Oh
me to
my
one
God.
last, yeah, dark and like, whoa, like holy shit, like guys, like looking back on that, I'm like, whoa, no, that wasn't good. Now I'm like, as a GM, I shouldn't have let that happen. There's some things I should have, like,
I mean,
should
that
have
was a
pumped
pretty
the
hard
brakes.
party to GM for, period.
Yeah, I was like, I should have pumped the brakes on that a little more than I did. But I was on this, honestly, at, I think it was like 16. I was so fucking floored at what was happening, how mad you guys were.
Yeah.
That I was just like, I think if I don't let them do this, they're just going to riot at me in the real world.
That was probably the first visceral reaction you got out of us in the whole
game.
Yeah.
Because like up until that point, you guys were just like, yeah, we'll stop the Lich King, but so we can take over. And then like this, I was like, it's enough of a reason for them to do something. But like, oh, they were too slow, and the dice say that she's turned into an evil monster, so they have to kill her. And then like you guys just were like, they have to pay, and I'm like, oh no. But this actually brings me to like one point I did want to hit on before we kind of wrapped up, and I know we're a little over time, because it ties in, which is like something I do with my campaign settings now is I tend to live in a world that is like, or I create a world that is far more idyllic than ours. You know, like Westeros is a kind of horribly sexist and racist and queer-phobic setting for a story. And I'm not interested in that. Like, as a person, I don't write novels like that. I don't tell stories. I just don't. And so when I make my campaign settings, you know, they tend to be really heavy on quote unquote representation, even though my audience is tiny. And like I've stopped including things just being inherently evil. Like if you know what I mean, like inherently evil, like goblins haven't been inherently evil in my campaigns for almost a decade now. Just stuff like that, where it's like, I'm not against talking about big issues in my games. But if my players want to play a queer or trans character, anything they want, I am not going to inflict upon them fantasy, bigotry, and structural racism, sexism. I'm not going to put that in the world.
Well, that's not why people go to the table to play these games, right? Like nobody.
Well, nobody I want to play with, at least.
Yes, nobody. Nobody that you and I would want to play with, and probably a good chunk of people that we know wouldn't want to play in a game like that. Because what is the point of
exactly
like what is the point of playing these games if not to dream up a more idyllic world and to run around in one and give yourself hope, right?
Part of the fantasy for me is that the Dwarven Kingdom is run by a pair of married kings. You know, that's part of the fantasy for me. And I was wondering, from your answers to this, has clearly made it perfectly clear to me that like that's how you operate as well. On the show, on Diceology, I included more of it, especially in the 11 Jump Gates series. Having had a conversation with the players that we wanted to approach this, it was definitely much more around classism, and hateful religions than anything else.
In terms of portraying those on the show?
Yeah, like there was, and part of it had to do with the fact that when we sat down to make it, it was very much me having a conversation, like where I was like, hey, the story I want to work with is about a setting that is very much talking about some very negative forces in our real world, in this case being a hyper capitalism, fundamentalist religion, and imperialism, these three things. And I want to really examine that. And so we're going to have to include some things. We kind of fantasied it up. Like, for example, one of the groups that was hated was magic users, for example. And there were like class divides and things like that. And imperialism was very real. But I still kind of kept like overt, like direct, like racism and sexism out, because I wanted to talk about these forces in a realistic way without taking away from the joy of playing these games. And honestly, me being who I am and who I identify as, these are not my stories to tell. It is my job and my responsibility to include and represent people, but I cannot, like, there is nothing worse I could do than try and tell the story of a black queer woman in America, right? Like, I can't tell that story. Not honestly. It's my job to platform that person. It's my job to, show that person's work off everywhere I can. And it's my job to include, queer black women prominently in my stories, but it is not,
right.
It's not a story about that experience. And because it's still storytelling, I feel like all of this really matters. Like, for this new campaign I'm doing, I changed the term race to ancestries because I'm just kind of sick and tired of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge reason why in the game I'm playing on my show, we're using Quest, because there isn't, you don't pick a race, you don't pick like a direct ancestor. You kind of craft it out of key verbs that you decide upon.
Exactly. And on top of that too, like, we were very conscious and deliberate with our setting to not represent, things that were dark as evil. That was something we were very deliberate. So the villain of the show effectively is a golden, bright, like white dragon, effectively, with golden scales that reflects light everywhere, and it's magnifying the sun. We flipped a lot of things. There is comfort and safety in night for these characters, and I think it's like, as game masters, right? We are facilitators, and we are people that have a lot of control over these things, and we definitely have a responsibility to, reflect the world that we want to see and the world that is around us in ways that are digestible, responsible, and safe for our players, right? Exactly.
And I think that it can be very like there's a right way and there's a wrong way to be inclusive, right? And the way you described, right, of if you were to tell a black queer woman's story, that wouldn't really work at all.
Not my story to tell.
Yeah, exactly. Not your story to tell. But that doesn't mean you can't include black queer women in your story.
It's not even that I couldn't. It's not even that I couldn't or shouldn't make them prominent, even central main characters. It's that I can't tell the struggle of being that person and identity in America. Like, I can't do that.
Right.
But that person deserves to be the center of a story, because stories can be universal, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly 100%. And I think that it's such an interesting thing.
Right. Yeah. And it's something that's like changed over time. Like, when I sat down to make the Immortals game, I wasn't thinking about any of this. I was 16 and I was like trying to think about what monsters you guys wanted to fight.
Yeah.
But as it's, evolved and I've evolved, I can't responsibly do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and the kinds of games and the kinds of people that we play games with have changed,
right. Like we played with mostly a bunch of like high school white dudes.
Yeah. I literally think me and Ryan were the only Asian guys at the table.
Yep.
and we didn't think much of it, right? And it's like
right.
And I think that like that's changed, and I think like I remember you and I would always talk about how like we need to get new people at the table all the time because like we need other voices to sort of quell other parts of the group or to bring a different perspective to it. And I think that like when we shifted to playing with like Sam and Will and those like last few games that one summer, that was a completely different role playing experience.
Yeah, you know? and then in college I played with a group that was exclusively women and queer people. Mm-hmm. Like I was the lone straight white dude. Like that was I was it. And I was like, this is entirely different. Like I was like, holy shit, this is a completely different vibe.
Yeah, no, I had the same experience, except I started playing with like all of my Asian friends. We were all playing together and I was like, wow, this is completely different. The things we're considering, the things that we're talking about at the table, the things that we are thinking about are things that I've been craving for so many years. But just couldn't put into words like what I was craving, the sort of like perspectives and ideas, right? Because it's like, I don't know, like this is a topic for a separate episode. And there's a great podcast called Asians Represent where they talk about Oriental adventures. But there's like a reason why like I don't think I ever personally felt comfortable running like an Oriental adventures campaign setting, right?
Yeah, and like here's like a thing that here's a truth. I really like the monk class in D&D and I feel weird playing it these days. Like I'm like
I'm a full supporter of removing monk and just calling it martial artist.
Yeah, like I'm just like I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, no, and that was a stipulation I made when I was coming up with the show setting. I told everybody, I was like, look, when I say monk, that is what I'm going to use in place of priest. When I say martial artist, that's what I'm going to use in place of someone who fights with just their hands and feet.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I'm separating the two because personally I want to do that. And like, I don't know, like, I think one of my favorite games of all time, like I played it with like a guy, a girl, and a non-binary person. And it was just the four of us in a room, you know, trying really hard not to commit arson and trying really hard to, like I told them before, I was like, I really want to be intentional about the game and I really want to be intentional about the decisions you all make in game. Like, don't just assume I want you to kill everything. And that led to them befriending a minotaur at the end of a maze. That led to them befriending like half the bandits they met along the way.
Yes.
Like,
so, can I tell you a thing I did in 11 Jump Gates?
Yes.
This is so here's a secret in 11 Jump Gates that if you listen to, you will basically hear this always. Is that whenever guns got involved, I upped the difficulty hard. And if both parties had guns and were going to shoot at each other, it immediately jumped to the hardest difficulty because the mechanics we were playing, I could set the difficulty of all actions. And I remember this, like anytime a gun came out, like the difficulty was like 2 to 5, like things would jump to 4 if you were lucky and 5 almost exclusively, because I was like, guns are so fucking dangerous. Like you're not, you can't get into like a blow to blow where you take multiple gunshots. Like bullshit. No, like if the gun comes out, if you're choosing to escalate to guns, then bad things can and are much more likely to suddenly start happening to you.
Exactly.
So no, I'm not going to lower the difficulty. I don't care how good you are with the gun. It's not about that. It's about the fact that you've brought a gun into the situation, because that's the thing I wanted to talk about, especially if I was going to run a game and a show that centralized characters wielding guns. Right. Is I didn't want that to seem like the best fucking option.
As a game master, you have to think about these sorts of consequences and what kind of a world philosophy you're putting forward. And like, if you play in the Forgotten Realms, everybody fucking murders each other all the fucking time. It's a world where children get killed. Like, that's normal.
And so like with this new thing that I'm doing, like with Dungeon World, I capped damage way lower than normal for players. Like I was like, nope, damage is going to stop about here. And my reasoning for that was, I was like, I don't want to get to a point where for fun adventure combat encounters, enemies need to be able to soak a lot of hits to feel dangerous. What I would rather is that every enemy, this is kind of something I stole from Dark Souls, can take a couple hits, usually, from you, and you can take a couple hits from them forever. Like, I don't want you to feel like combat ever becomes trivial. I want you to feel like if you've drawn a sword, okay, this is dangerous.
Yeah, there should be a weight to it.
I want violence to matter. I don't want to take it away because, adventure stories, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and if we wanted, and I've played nonviolent games before, things like Fall of Magic or Dust of the Traveled Road, all these things. Like, if you want to play a nonviolent game, they're out there. They're amazing. Go play them. I've done it. It's great. Please do it more. Speaking of which, some lovely acquaintances of mine are running a Kickstarter right now for their sports anime RPG called Fight with Spirit, and you should go check it out. They have the quick start rules out already, so you can play it. I helped playtest like almost a year or two ago, and it was incredible. I loved that game so much.
Oh my goodness. We'll put a link in the description.
Yeah, we'll link in the description. It's so good. If you want to go play that game that's like non-violent, go. They're out there. They're amazing.
Yeah.
These games, like, the part of the deal is that we're playing a swashbuckly game. There's going to be violence. But I do want people to still think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyways, we've almost gone an hour.
Yeah, as you predicted off mic.
Yeah, this one.
You all are in for a treat. We had a lot of thoughts. We had a lot of things. We're both in the middle of working on these big, expansive worlds, and I'm really curious to see how your world develops, and I'm really curious to see how mine develops. We should do a PDF swap at some point. I would be so curious, since I'm not playing in your game and you're not playing in mine, and I mean, yes, technically it might spoil some things for the show, but it's okay. I trust you.
It is okay. I don't mind spoilers very much.
Wow.
Oh, we should do an episode about spoilers. We should do that.
All right. Yeah. I have a friend that solely believes that spoilers enhance the experience, which I will want to talk about. But long story short, everybody, make a campaign setting that is good for you, your players, and the kinds of stories you want to have at the table, because it is your story and it is your friend's story, and crafting your own campaign setting can do that.
And also, if you do want to use the pre-made ones, that's awesome too.
Yeah.
Just make sure that you're centering your players.
Yeah.
Like, you've played fantastic games in Greyhawk. You have.
Yeah.
I've played amazing games in Ravenloft. Myself, like.
Yeah.
And like right now I'm playing a very fun game that is set in the Forgotten Realms. So like, it can be done, and it comes down to what you as a GM need. So you do you.
Yeah. Just don't have Dritz Word and show up and save your players all the goddamn time.
No.
Please
don't. That's not fun.
Yeah, that's not fun. That's just pity.
That's when that's fun? That's fun at the end of season 2 of Mandalorian. It is not fun in your own campaign where you're supposed to be the Luke Skywalker, right? Like,
exactly.
Spoilers for Mandalorian. Too late.
If you haven't seen it by now, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. Did you miss that? Did you?
Yeah. Have you not seen the internet?
Question: you listen to this podcast?
Yeah.
How do you not like? How do you listen to this podcast and then not know that on some level, or have seen a GIF of Luke tearing up Dark Trooper? Like, I'm very curious. Like, if you are that person and I spoiled something for you, get at us, because I would like to chat with you.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're gonna wrap this up real quick.
Yep.
You can find me everywhere at Benig-Aiello. And Dane, where can we find you and your stuff?
You can find me at danewrites.com.
Fantastic. And thank you all for listening to our episode about campaign setting philosophy. go listen to Diceology so you can have context for all of this stuff that we talked about. And you can check out my new show, Dice and Pizza.
Yes, please go check that out. That shit's super good.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, buddy. You're a big influence on that.
Thanks. Gotta say, just pitch for people who may not have heard our shows. We are like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would say if you're looking for an Asian influenced, done by and for people from that culture, that sort of actual place show, go check Derek's out. If you're looking for something really weird, artsy, and alternative that's sad and very political, hi.
Yeah. If you want to listen to people talk about food, giant dragons, and I don't know, stuff. Yeah, that's my show. And Dane's show has a lot of robots.
If you want the dangers of hypercapitalism while talking about sad robots that are also lesbians, there you go. That's mine.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week.